They told me the desert cleans the mind the way wind cleans a bell, slowly, without apology. I went there to forget one sin that wouldn't loosen its teeth. The monk said, "Walk until the thought grows tired of following." I walked. The dunes moved like breaths made visible. The sun wore the color of old brass. Even the vultures respected my silence. On the third day, the sand began to answer my footsteps with the rhythm of a chant I knew by heart. I tried not to hear it. I counted beads that were no longer on my wrist. I named the 8 winds and let them pass through me. Still, the cadence rose, patient as a teacher who knows you will arrive late but arrive. By the 5th day, I found stones arranged like a forgotten stupa, half swallowed by the dune. Incense ash slept there, too old for scent, and a bronze bowl turned green by centuries of weather. I bowed until my suspicion bent into something softer. When I lifted my head, there were footprints beside mine, fresh, leading away. The shape of the heel matched my own. I followed them toward the white horizon where heat makes sky dream of river. The prints never faltered. Whoever had left them did not tire, did not doubt. When I crested the last rise, I saw him seated in the shade of a dead tamarisk that still remembered leaves. He faced east, hands joined, eyes closed, lips moving with a vow that once belonged to me. "Master," I said before I could stop myself, "are you a bodhisattva or a mirage?" He opened his eyes. They were neither holy nor thirsty. They were careful. "I am the God who committed your sin first," he said. "Now that you have come to forget it, sit and remember it correctly." The wind bowed. The sand stilled. I sat. He did not ask my name. He asked for water. I poured from my skin flask into the bronze bowl we found between us, its rim bit by corrosion in the shape of small teeth. The water caught the sun and shivered. He lifted it but did not drink. He held it the way a monk holds a bell before dawn. "What sin are you running from?" he asked. "The kind we decorate with good reasons," I said. I broke a vow to protect someone by telling the truth. The truth ruined him. He tilted the bowl so the water made a thin mouth. A knife can cut fruit or rope or throat. We do not prosecute steel. We teach hands. He set the bowl down. "Where does your shame sit? In the mouth that spoke or the heart that chose?" "In the heart," I said, and felt the admission put on my tongue like a warm stone. "Show me." I opened my robe at the chest. Nothing, of course. Skin, bone, the old scar from a winter cough. He nodded at the earth. "There." My shadow was dark against the sand. Another shadow sat beside it. His, I thought, until I leaned closer. It was mine as well, drawn longer, older. The sun had not moved. The dune had not shifted. But my shadow had learned a second posture. "2 shadows," I said. "2 keepers," he corrected. "One that remembers, one that repeats. Which are you?" I did not answer. He closed his eyes again. The wind resumed, careful as a librarian. "When I was still a god," he said, "devotees brought me guilt dressed as devotion. They laid it at my feet and called it offering. I accepted until their temples were too heavy to enter. So I committed their sins ahead of them, to dilute the karma in my own body. It worked, until it didn't." "How did it fail?" "I confused compassion with permission." He rose. "A god in desert robes looks like a rumor learning to walk." He led me east until the dune broke open like a page. Below, half buried, lay the plaza of a caravanserai, its arches still shouldering sky. Blue tiles clung to shadowed walls, stubborn, dignified. In the center stood a pedestal with nothing on it but the memory of weight. "Once," he said, "a mirror sat here. Pilgrims looked and saw not faces but deeds. Too many mistook recognition for absolution. They went home unchanged. So I shattered the mirror and made the desert carry its pieces. That was my first theft from you. Your second is yours to name. I told a truth that broke a man, I said. I told it because it was true, not because it was kind. He smiled without praise. Good. You have chosen the correct direction to bow. He brushed sand from the pedestal. A shallow groove crossed its top, worn by centuries of offerings sliding toward stillness. Now show me how your truth walked. I tried to speak the story as we tell sutras, measured, precise, cooled by grammar. He shook his head. This isn't temple speech. Say it the way a wound asks to be cleaned. So I did. I told him about the friend who traded compassion for influence, how he used dharma like a market stall, taking coins wherever they fell. I told him how I opened my mouth in a full hall and named the cost. I told him how his students scattered like birds from a bell. I told him how he found a rope that night and tied a knot faith couldn't loosen. Stop, the god said softly, and the sand obeyed. I told it because it was true, I repeated, smaller. He pointed at my doubled shadow. The longer one curled like a question mark. That shadow spoke, he said. The other held the rope. When you returned to your mat and called it honesty, both learned to share a body. I knelt by the pedestal. My knees warmed the stone the way the sun warms memory. What should I have done? What you will do now. Tell the truth as if you will live with it. He placed his palm to the sand. A circle cleared, small as a begging bowl. Say the words again here. Then stay until the wind has worn their edges kind. I hesitated. Will he be forgiven? He was quiet, a long breath. Forgiveness is not the God's to give. It is the garment the living decide is worth wearing again. He looked at the horizon where the desert wore a thin silver thread of heat. But we can teach the tailor. I pressed my hand to the circle. The grains were cool, innumerable, obedient. I spoke the truth again, the same syllables. But this time I left the doors open on both ends of the sentence, as if someone older might want to walk through later. When I finished, the wind sifted my words until they lost the angles I had sharpened out of fear. What remained were letters that looked like footprints. You see, he said. The desert remembers, but it is not petty. It keeps only what can be carried. We sat until the sun slid lower, and the plaza line softened like a face after weeping. He refilled the bowl and this time drank. Even gods require water. He handed me the rest. It tasted of coin and cloud. What happens now? I asked. Now we go where I committed it first, he said, and stood. If you cannot forgive me for teaching it to you by example, you will never forgive yourself for learning quickly. We turned west. My two shadows rose like twin banners and then merged as the sun gave us back to ourselves. In the near distance, a line of half-buried statues held their broken mudras against the wind. They looked like monks who had learned patience so well they had mistaken it for stone. I bowed to them, to him, to the circle I had drawn, and to the silence that held all four politely. Then I followed the god, and the desert did not object. We walked west until the sun became thin as a coin, balancing on the lip of horizon. The god led without haste, his robe brushing sand into small, deliberate furrows. The wind, that tireless scribe, erased each mark as soon as it formed. The desert keeps nothing, he said without looking back. That is why it endures. I tried to match his pace, but my legs trembled with the kind of fatigue that doesn't belong to muscle. If this is where you sinned, I said, then what did you take from this place? Faith, he answered, and gave back certainty, both mistakes. Night arrived without permission. Stars blinked awake, too many, too near. They shimmered not like lamps but like eyes practicing restraint. The sand cooled quickly, sighing as it exhaled its stored heat. The god stopped by a half-buried shrine, a square of stone marked by faded reliefs of hands releasing birds. Inside lay a single drum, skin cracked, rim gilded with age. He knelt before it. "Once," he said, "I taught men to chant their guilt into the wind. They came from the valleys carrying grief like baskets. They beat this drum until the sound found a listener. But there was no listener, only echoes." He touched the drum. It groaned softly, a tired heart remembering its function. So I answered their echoes. I became the voice they imagined. That was my compassion and my deceit. I sat opposite him, watching the stars crawl along the rim of the bowl sky. And the echo? It liked being believed. It began to believe itself. The drum began to hum under his hand, low and tremulous. A tone rose, deep enough to move the sand into circles around us. I felt my ribs vibrate. The air tasted of iron and distant rain. "Strike it," he said. "I don't know the rhythm." "Then play the shape of your regret." I raised my hand and struck. The sound was dry, cracked, but it traveled. The dunes caught it and returned it thinner. I struck again, harder. The god joined me, each of his beats falling between mine, teaching them humility. The pulse quickened until I could no longer tell who led. The stars wavered. For a moment the dunes became waves, and I felt the floor of the ocean beneath them, cold, patient. Shapes moved there, statues, bones, and something older. "Why does it sound like water?" I asked. "Because guilt is fluid," he said. "It waits for a vessel." The rhythm slowed, the air settled. The drum's skin dimmed to its proper silence. I leaned forward, sweat cooling too quickly. "Did you find peace by answering them?" He smiled, tired, gentle. "Peace isn't a place we find. It's the distance we agree to keep from noise." He brushed sand over the drum, burying it halfway again. "Every truth needs silence to prove it can stand." We resumed walking. The stars burned whiter, as if polished by our movement. Ahead, the dunes shifted into shapes that were almost architecture, spires, gates, broken arches. As we approached, I realized they were statues kneeling toward the east, their heads bowed under the sand's slow mercy. Between them wound a narrow path of black stone, smooth as water frozen mid-flow. "This is where I spoke first," he said, before language was ashamed of echoing itself. Each step on the path made a sound, soft vowels, fragments of prayers long untaught. The wind picked them up and arranged them into sentences that weren't sentences at all, just intonations of belonging. One phrase formed clearly: "We remember your sin kindly." I stopped walking. "Did you hear that?" He nodded. "The desert borrows voices from those who no longer need them. Listen carefully. One of them may be yours." I listened. Beneath the wind's hum, I heard a thread of sound that carried my own tone. Hoarse, tired, unmistakably human. It was repeating my confession from the circle we had left behind. Each word traveled across the dunes, smaller each time, until it was no more than breath. "They're learning your regret," he said. "They'll polish it until it forgets to cut." The statues watched as we passed, faces eroded into expressions that looked like mercy. The god stopped at the largest, a headless figure holding an empty bowl. He placed his palm on its chest. The stone warmed, light leaking through old cracks. "This was me," he said, "before I learned how to hide in weather." The statue's bowl began to fill, not with water, but with a dim radiance, the color of dawn remembered, not seen. He turned to me. "This is where I first mistook creation for forgiveness. I built these shapes hoping to prove to myself that intention can outlast error. Did it?" He shook his head. "They pray without mouths now. I listen without ears. Together, we maintain the balance between silence and arrogance." He stepped back. The statuesque light brightened until the desert around us looked like the inside of an eyelid before waking. "You ask to forget your sin," he said. "But forgetfulness is a small comfort. Would you rather remember it differently?" I hesitated. The wind brushed my cheek like a fingertip waiting for permission. "Yes," I said finally. "Then tomorrow you will walk into the place where gods go to be forgiven by men." He turned east again, as if dawn already lived there. "Bring nothing but your thirst. Even water will lie to you in that place." I wanted to ask what he meant, but his outline was already thinning, the way shapes fade when the eye has understood enough to rest. The wind carried his final words like incense smoke that refuses to die. By the time dawn returned, the god had vanished into horizon light. Only his footprints remained, leading toward a shimmer that might have been heat or revelation. I followed. Each step sank with the slow assurance of surrender. The sun rose heavy, deliberate, a monk carrying a bowl of fire. Around noon, the mirage solidified into palms, water, shade, an oasis so precise it hurt to believe. I touched one tree. The bark was cool, the smell green and confident. "Real," I whispered, suspicious. A woman's voice answered from the water. "Real enough to test you." The oasis lake reflected the sky too perfectly. At its center stood a figure waist-deep, hands pressed together. Her face was the same calm mask as the gods, but gentler, younger, as if forgiveness had taken feminine shape. She smiled. "You've brought your sin. Good." "I came to forgive the god who committed it," I said. "Then you must judge him first," she said, "and that means judging yourself." She motioned to the sand behind me. There sat a low stone altar covered in dust. Upon it rested a mirror framed with old wood, the surface blackened and pulsing faintly like a heart under ice. "This is the bowl of reflections," she said. "Every deity leaves one behind when they fall quiet. Look and decide who taught whom." I approached. The air around the mirror bent like heat above stone. I saw not my face, but the gods. Tired, infinite, uncertain. The woman stepped closer, her reflection overlapping his. I told the truth because silence was worse. The mirror brightened, separating into two images, myself and the god, standing side by side. The god's mouth opened. My voice came out. The mirror rippled. Water spilled from its frame, spreading across the altar, until it became a small pool. Inside it, reflections folded into one another. Monk and deity, accuser and confessor, wound and salve. The woman said, "Every god must face his maker. Every man must learn he was both." I looked down. The pool's surface showed me not kneeling, but standing between two versions of myself, one holding a flame, one holding water. They bowed to each other and stepped back into me. A warmth spread from my chest outward, neither fire nor mercy, but understanding. "Is that forgiveness?" I asked. She smiled. "That is balance. Forgiveness is what remains when balance becomes natural." The oasis dimmed. Its color drained until palms became gray silhouettes. The water in the pool evaporated without steam, leaving behind a faint ring of white sand, salt from tears never shed. "Where is the god now?" I asked. She pointed upward. The sun burned steady, its edge trembling like a candle refusing to die. "He has returned to what all gods become when they stop being worshipped. Wind, echo, instruction." "And me?" "You will continue walking," she said. "Because remembering is your vow now. The sin you feared was only a teacher in disguise. Keep walking until even memory becomes compassion." The oasis shimmered again, thinning into air. The palms dissolved first, then the woman, then the reflection itself. I stood in sand that had forgotten it once held water. I looked down. My footprints filled themselves slowly with light. I began walking again, though the world no longer behaved as distance should. Every step I took repeated itself a heartbeat later, as if the desert were tracing my motion in echo. My footprints shimmered, filling with light and then closing like eyes deciding to rest. The horizon bent into circles. The dunes shifted in patterns too symmetrical for chance. Wind brushed the surface into spirals, and within each spiral, smaller ones. The sand was drawing, a mandala so large I could not see its center. I stopped. The air was motionless, yet the design continued to grow. From above, it would have looked like a wheel made of gold dust and silence. I understood. The desert was recording not direction, but intention. A voice rose from nowhere, soft, amused. "You are being remembered." It was the god again, no longer beside me, not quite within. His tone had changed, lighter, almost human. "Every grain of sand is a syllable. Walk carefully, or the sentence will never end." "I thought you were gone," I said. "Gone?" His laughter was wind sliding over hollow stone. "I am simply distributed. This is what happens to gods when men stop naming them. They become punctuation." The mandala expanded. At its center, a faint column of light pulsed like the spine of the world. I followed it. The closer I came, the more the air tasted of copper and prayer. The ground hummed underfoot, the same pitch as the drum we had buried. "What is this place?" I asked. "The pattern beneath karma," the voice said. "You are standing where deeds are translated into motion." I knelt, tracing a single spiral with my finger. The sand shifted under my touch, forming an image. A small boy offering rice to a shrine, then an old man sweeping the same steps decades later. The image blurred into both at once, youth and age bound in repetition. "I've been here before," I whispered. "Of course," said the god. We all returned to our own handwriting. I rose and looked to the center, where the light column widened into a pool of still air. In its surface, I saw the mandala mirrored, infinite. A memory struck me like cool water. My master's voice, years ago, saying, "Meditation is not escape, it is apprenticeship to impermanence." The desert answered by erasing half the pattern with a single breath. The remaining shapes rearranged themselves instantly, complete again. Impermanence maintaining order. It was almost funny. The god spoke once more. Quieter now. "This is what I could never accept when I was worshipped. That even perfection must die to prove itself harmless." I walked toward the center. The light grew until my body was transparent. My shadow vanished, and I could see the veins of my own hands glowing like rivers of molten mercy. The heat was no longer punishment. It was comprehension. At the mandala's heart stood a small stone wheel, half buried. Its rim was etched with characters older than speech. The god whispered, "Turn it." I placed both hands on the wheel and pushed. It moved with the weight of seasons. As it turned, the design around me rotated in answer. Each revolution brought back a sound, the drum's heartbeat, the monk's chant, the wind's language, my own confession. When the wheel made its seventh turn, the desert fell silent. The light folded inward, collapsing gently until it rested within the palm of my hand, a single glowing grain of sand. "Keep it," said the god. "You'll need a reminder that even dust once believed it could become divine." I closed my hand. The glow sank into my skin, fading until only warmth remained. Around me, the desert smoothed itself clean. The mandala disappeared, but its symmetry stayed behind, quiet, precise, alive beneath the surface. I looked up. The sky had deepened to the color of wet ink. A single star blinked at the center, patient and perfectly placed. "Is it over?" I asked. "For now," the god replied. "But remember, enlightenment is not release. It is recognition. Keep walking until the world forgets you kindly." The wind stirred once, scattering the last of the light. I took a breath, tasting both dust and clarity, and stepped forward. The desert, content, began drawing again. By dusk, the wind had quieted. The dunes flattened until they resembled a sea after confession. Calm, indifferent, infinite. I walked until the color of the world shifted from gold to the pale blue of forgetting. Ahead, the desert ended in a thin horizon of stone, an edge so sharp it looked drawn with a Monk S-brush. Beyond it lay the world of men, villages, rumor, attachment, names. I stopped at the boundary. Behind me, the desert breathed once, long and low, a single syllable of farewell. The air there no longer burned. It simply existed, waiting for another pilgrim who would mistake pain for purification. The god's voice returned, quiet, scattered, as if spoken through the grains themselves. You have carried your sin as a student carries a lamp, high enough to light the road, low enough to remember its weight. You can leave it here now. I closed my eyes. Inside my chest, the warmth of that single glowing grain of sand pulsed like a hidden mantra. For a moment I considered staying, letting the desert finish turning me into story. But memory is a kind teacher only when it's shared. I opened my hand. The grain rolled from my palm onto the ground. It did not fall. It entered. The sand drank it eagerly, as if reclaiming a lost word. A ripple spread outward, brief and precise. Then silence. Is this forgiveness? I asked. No, said the god, the voice now so faint it could have been thought. It is continuation. Forgiveness is what the world becomes when it stops needing witnesses. The wind stirred, tracing faint circles around my feet. I felt the shape of the old mandala beneath me, erased, but not gone. It hummed softly, a memory rehearsing itself without regret. I turned toward the stone horizon. The first sound from beyond it was ordinary, bells maybe, or laughter carried by distance. My throat tightened at the familiarity. I had forgotten how mortal joy trembles before it speaks. One step, I told myself. The sand shifted, unwilling to hold me. My foot sank, then rose, leaving no trace. The desert had learned well. At the edge, I looked back one final time. The vast expanse shimmered under twilight, every grain briefly illuminated before sleep. It looked nothing like penance. It looked like peace finally allowed to be plain. The goddess' final whisper reached me as I crossed the boundary. Go tell them that the desert never punishes. It only listens until you stop lying. I smiled, though the gesture belonged to no one in particular. The stone underfoot was cool. Wind moved through my robe with the tenderness of old prayer flags. As the first village lights appeared ahead, I bowed to them, to the desert behind me, and to the silence that had taught me how to speak without harm. And though I was walking again among men, every breath carried a trace of that sand, the taste of confession polished smooth by time. I did not forget my sin. I remembered it kindly. They say deserts devour all things, bodies, footprints, even gods. But that isn't true. Deserts do not devour, they digest. They turn what we bring into something finer, something light enough to be carried by wind. If you ever walk there seeking to lose yourself, don't rush. The desert does not care for quick apologies. Speak your truth slowly enough for silence to understand. And when it answers, don't argue. It has buried greater men with gentler hands. The god I met is gone now, scattered among dunes, resting in each breath of dust that moves at dusk. Sometimes, when the air is dry and honest, I hear him again. A small whisper reminding me that sin and prayer are only two words for the same motion. One exhale, one return. I left my guilt there to be rewritten by time. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still taste sand between my teeth, and I smile, knowing it is not punishment, but memory doing its sacred work.